Welcome to today's discussion on the Federalist and Anti-Federalist Papers, sponsored by the Principles of Freedom Foundation. The purpose of this foundation is to provide a platform for discussing the ideas pertaining to freedom, just as was done in the town squares, churches, and taverns during the founding era of this nation. Ideally, those who listen to or participate in this discussion will have come prepared by having read the materials to be discussed today. Participating in today's discussion are Tyler and Tiffany Mason, Derek Harris, Julie Farnbach, and myself, Brooklyn McClure. We hope you will continue to participate in the discussion of freedom even beyond this podcast by commenting on our Facebook group, YouTube channel, and most importantly, by having dialogue with your family and friends. So for this week's reading, we read a few papers by Hamilton, which were really focused on defending the executive branch and the president in the Constitution, and also a couple papers, one by Cato, and who was the other one by? It was President as the Military King. I don't know if I remember who the author was, but they were arguing that this president, this new executive branch in the Constitution, would create a tyrant and a king, which is what they were trying to avoid. So, I mean, I would say both arguments were equally powerful. I felt like Alexander Hamilton did a great job using logic and reasoning to prove that the executive is not like a king. But then I felt like Cato and the other did a pretty good job at exhibiting how this could lead to another tyrannical system. So I wanted to open it up by asking you guys what you felt, who you felt, I don't know if we want to say won this argument, because it was pretty equally weighed. And so I'll start by reading this quote from Cato from letter 5 and get your opinion on whether you think this has come to pass, this prophecy of his. He says, "Americans are like other men in similar situations. When the manners and opinions of the community are changed by the causes I mentioned before, and your political compact inexplicit, your posterity will find that great power connected with ambition, luxury, and flattery will as readily produce a Caesar, Caligula, Nero, Domitian? What was it, Derek? In America, as the same—
Domitian.
Domitian, thank you. Domitian, as the same causes did in the Roman Empire. So do you think that's come to pass? Do you think he was just really off his rocker and overly paranoid? What are your thoughts, either on this quote or on the arguments between Hamilton and these anti-federalists? Okay, I will make my commentary. So I found it actually, in pondering this week, to be a little more personal than maybe political. But I made a note in my margins here, and I said, it's caused me to ponder and pause about my own zeal and reactivity to certain situations in life, whether it's political or personal, or these deeply held beliefs I've had, because I read Cato and I felt like he was very persuasive in saying this executive branch is very dangerous, and that it could possibly create, because you're not explicit enough in what the powers are with this president and the vice president, that it could end up creating another tyrant and someone who's going to just take over all power and not stick to what they are confined to in the Constitution. And so then the question was, okay, that's possible. And I think throughout the years we've seen with, especially with the abuse of the executive orders, that a little bit of that has come to pass. Regardless of what the political party has been, it's happened on both sides of the aisle. We've had this power grab using executive powers and other means to circumvent the constitutional powers of the executive branch. And so I was just pondering, okay, well, we could have said, oh, you're right, Cato, this is going to happen. So then would it have been better to have not adopted the Constitution at all? And in my opinion, no, it's better that we still adopted the Constitution and have had this over 200 years of freedom in our nation. And I think it would have been tragic to not have adopted it. I feel like all the things that they were fearing, that the Anti-Federalists were fearing, would have come to pass in a shorter amount of time, in my opinion. They were fearing a king. They were fearing, you know, this dominant federal government. But I mean, you had already riots going on, you know, with Shays Rebellion and others who were rioting the same things in different states. There was too much democracy already with the Articles of Confederation. Those riots and protests would have continued, and I feel like it would have inevitably led to either another revolution, which is very common in countries that have revolutions, to be followed up by a second revolution. I feel like that would have come to pass, and who knows what we would have ended up with. Either another king, or maybe we would have finally woken up and said, okay, no, let's adopt that Constitution. So I do feel like it was beneficial to have adopted the Constitution, even though much of what the Anti-Federalists prophesied have come to pass. But it caused me to personally think about my own life. I can be very hard-lined on certain things. And once I know what I want and I know it's true, I will just set forth on that path without ever opening my mind or heart to something else. And I feel like that's the road that Cato and some of the Anti-Federalists were on. And I feel like, okay, wait, maybe I need to pause and have an open mind in certain other areas. Tyler, did you have a thought?
Just a question, actually. So based on what you're saying, would you say that the sentiment, it's better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all, would be applicable to this scenario where it's better to have had a constitution that functioned and operated and did all these things we needed it to do, that's brought us to here, where now we're having to really fight to maintain some of those freedoms that we established in the beginning. Is that akin to it's better to have loved and lost? And would you say that we have lost or that we are losing right now, talking about the Anti-Federalists and their fears and seeing some of them being made manifest in spite of everybody's best efforts?
Well, I didn't think I was going to feel good enough to have coherent thought, but your statement, Brooke, made it all clear in my own mind. And to Tyler's point, I love that. That's sort of the analogy I've been thinking of all this weeks that we've been studying. And yes, I think it's better to love and lost, to have loved and lost. But to Brooke's discussion, I think that we are, or maybe it's just me, we're tied to the context of our time, even as we read the documents from the 1700s, right? When they looked at Article 2 of the proposed Constitution, they weren't seeing 27 federal departments with 30,000 employees each spread all across the world doing 1,000 different things. They were looking at one person to start as the head of the executive branch. And as we look at Article 2 and evaluate how they've wrote that, we have to remember that Hamilton and Madison had been in that room planning the whole time with a balance of powers and a separation of powers, hierarchical, vertical, and horizontal, as they determined all of these different positions. And so when the comparisons and the complaints come in about just the executive branch, they're not, Cato et al. Are not thinking about the fact that Congress and a judicial branch are also going to provide a check on this person. And they're thinking of one person at the beginning. I mean, they barely had a War Department, and what they had under the Articles of Confederation couldn't pay the bills because they didn't have the power to tax or spend. So I think in Cato's, in the 1780s, their perspective was, we're declaring one person to be our head of state, and that sounds like a risk. But the big picture from our perspective is, we are looking at one person who steers the ship of state that's ginormous and out of control. And whereas it's appropriate for that executive, the leader of the executive branch, to give administrative orders to the departments that he oversees, it's certainly not appropriate for him or her to make executive orders that affect the legislative branch or the judicial branch or the people directly. So I think part of it's a perspective difference. Does that make sense? And we have to look at it in context of the history of their day and try not to react to it from our point of view all these years later.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that even brings background to my other point in my own life, where am I viewing things too myopically, and not bringing in a broader view, or not even listening to the other side. I mean, I think what you were saying was that Cato was a little more single-minded in that he thought it was only going to be this executive branch. I was under the impression that they had the full Constitution.
I think they did. I think this particular letter was focused on the head of state, and that they forgot about the balance and separation of powers as they criticized the potential of that person to become a tyrant too soon. That's just my perspective.
Okay.
You know, and as you mentioned this question and this loved and lost, I lived in France for a couple of years, and I was kind of surprised to learn we were in the Fifth Republic of France. Since that time in the late 1700s, as the French Revolution and this whole anarchy really led to Napoleon. And you see this all, I mean, I don't, you know, conditions are always different, but as I look, that's what they had to go by. They were looking at history, what lessons could they learn, what could they gain? And so as I look at this as well, there's certain turmoil with not having had a constitution or some strength to that. I mean, I really watched that, the anarchy of the French Revolution and the violence to it and this animosity that was there, and tend to think that the U.S. approach here with a constitution did provide a stability, and it did provide. And did they provide enough checks and balances to hold it in check? It seems that those things have worked, at least in large measure, compared to others in the world. I mean, we talk about being a new country, but our government, I don't know of many older ones, honestly, as far as our constitution goes. You know.
And for it to have been amended and reinterpreted or evaluated as few times as it has been, I think is definitely speaks volumes to the preparation that these men had to be able to draft such a document, which I think makes it that much more tragic now to see the lack of respect and the lack of understanding for exactly what it was that they tried to do with having these checks and balances system and preventing from having, one tyrannical ruler who's in control. And, you look back over the last administration, for sure, people, were very polarized. We've got a tyrant. But then you see President Biden that's come in and all the executive orders that he's already written, his time in office. And, I'm sure you could probably follow it back over a period of time where people are saying, well, there's too much power, as long as that power is wielded in a way that doesn't agree to your political views. And I think that goes back to what it was that Brooke had mentioned a little bit, where do we really stop? Do we really take a minute and pause and consider the biases with which we view things? Now, that doesn't mean that we need to stop and automatically change our viewpoint either, but how much of what we do is a knee-jerk reaction to the fact that, well, I disagree with the party lines, or I disagree with blank, right? These great men, they managed to kind of put that aside and look at the greater good. And I think we really started to lack the ability to do that.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I had a couple thoughts with David and with Tyler and Julia. We'll see if I can tie it all together. But when Tyler first asked, is it better to have loved and lost? It sounded like related, but I was like, there's an underlying principle too, I think, that actually drives either your choice to love or to choose this new path of this Constitution. And I feel like the word that keeps coming is faith. And I think about the difference again between our government and what it was founded on, and our even War of Independence compared to France. France's was very godless, and ours was full of God, and we would not have won without God's intervention, even with the weather, bringing in fog, so they could cross the Delaware, bringing in storms so that they would be protected. We had God. And so I feel like, and maybe that answers the question too of, okay, when I'm starting to get a little too bull-nosed on something, and I do need to take it to God and say, okay, should I be as strong on this, or is this more ego-driven, or is it actually God-driven? Because you do want to be driven for sure, but maybe the foundation is really God, and God is love. So is it better to have loved and loved? Yes, it's better to have had that faith and gone forth and loved, and also to always be consulting with God in our own personal lives and in our country.
I think it's about faith in each other too, faith in mankind. And we talk about that a lot. The founding fathers were very aware of human nature as they'd studied it and studied history. But they had faith in their fellow men to do their best, to bring their best effort, to be people of honesty and integrity and education. And I think maybe that's where we fall down now. We get trapped in the blame game rather than assuming that everybody we meet are the voters here or there are deserve to have an influence. So we don't have enough faith in them.
That's true. And also, to go along with, well, there's a common statement today I've noticed, especially among teenagers in high schools where they're having some of these political debates, is especially one side of the aisle, if they don't agree, they will tell the other side, you don't have a right to an opinion. because your opinion isn't the same as mine or the rest of the class. You don't have a right to one. And so I feel like we've lost the, not only the faith in our fellow men, the art of debate. Everyone has a right to an opinion. It's like, but nobody knows how. Maybe it's the family breakdown that hasn't taught you how to have a discussion, and a decent discussion where we're not just name calling, or you're not just shutting someone down and saying, oh, you don't have a right to say that because it's different than mine. So maybe maybe that has to do with that, what you were saying, Julie, about you know, this, I don't know where that thought came from, actually. David, I think you had something to say.
Yeah, no, a mixture of thoughts here, because I think what's on my mind is something about what is our nature, who are we, and who are we in relation with each other. So I tend to not say necessarily have a ton of, I guess I'll use that word, faith in people, but I do know what our nature is and what it can be, and what the right circumstances, teaching, learning, can bring us to knowing what we are and who we are. I'm having more and more trouble nowadays separating the words truth, light, freedom, and love. They all seem to play very closely together. And I think this search for truth and freedom is something, if you don't mind, I've, you know, we talked a little bit prior to this meeting, just as kind of a spiritual thought. There's a book that I've read, it's called To Know as We Are Known. And it's education as a spiritual journey. And it talks about all these elements about opening a space within us. But it says, if we are to open space for knowing, and this is where I feel like with people, it's knowing people, it's truly feeling who we are in relation to God and that we are all connected. But it says we must be alert to our fear of not knowing. And that's what I see a lot of this evidence when we say, wait, you have no right to opinion, where it's our fear of knowing even, or even trying to understand someone else. There's a lot of fear there. There's this separation, this division, which is keeping us from truth, freedom, love, light. But he says, and our fearful tendency to fill the learning space. And there's so much to fill it with now. And I think more than ever, there are things to fill this place that normally, that could be a learning space that our founding fathers had, and the papers and the readings and the discussions, which is what we're trying to recreate here, is a different kind of an interactive learning and knowing each other more. But it says, first, we must see that not knowing is simply the first step towards truth. That the anxiety created by our ignorance calls not for instant answers, but for an adventure into the unknown. And that's a bit of that faith there, but looking at it as an adventure into the unknown. If we can affirm and search for truth as a continually uncertain journey, that's changed by other people even, you know, in our knowledge and knowing other people, he says, but we may find the courage to keep the space open rather than packing it with pretense. And second, a beautiful thing and very good news is that we must remember that we not only seek truth, but that truth seeks us as well. Knowing the truth will set us free. And this is all about freedom, to truly know God, to know each other, brings a unity, greater depth of knowledge, and ultimately the only way to truly have freedom, in my estimation, love, this connectedness. So yes, it does mean, you know, we're all different for being in this meeting and in this discussion, and it doesn't matter one whit if not a single other person watches this video, or as long as I'm opening a space to learn from those around me and allowing a space for truth. So
David, thanks for sharing that quote and that book. I'm trying really hard to take the thoughts in my head and frame them in a cohesive manner. So I beg your pardon as I kind of work my way through this, but I'm thinking about some of the things that we've talked about here. Faith. Let's start with that one first. Faith in humanity. And the question I started to ask myself is, well, can we have faith in humanity? Can we have faith in other people when we're so divided, when we're so angry that somebody else is bullying to get their way, and it doesn't matter which side of the political aisle, there's plenty of it to go around? Can I have faith in people when I feel like they're just looking for the slightest edge to turn their desires against my opinions, right? And I think that that makes for a difficult place to have faith. Now, don't get me wrong, I've got great faith in humanity to do great and amazing things. So I'm not trying to be doom and gloom with that comment, but that was the first thought that came to mind. And then David, as you shared that quote about the search for truth, it sparked a thought that I had. I was going to bring it up in one of the episodes a few weeks ago, and I don't think I did. I hope I didn't, so I'm not being redundant here. But I got contemplating the ease of access for information that we have at our fingertips, right? We have the ability to quickly find answers to just about anything. And we look at these founding fathers and how much they had to work and strive to be able to learn what they did. And how is it that we treat the technology and the information that we have right now? Netflix, Candy Crush, Fortnite, you name it, and it's squandered. And so as we talk about people seeking for truth and having faith in people, the thought that I have is it's hard to have faith in people as searching for truth when instead they're searching for intellect, not searching for truth. And the founding fathers, they were able to know they were all searching for truth, and they had their different ways of getting there, and they disagreed on all sorts of different concepts, but they were searching for truth. And that goes back to what Brooklyn had mentioned. They were seeking to have a moral compass in God, and versus France that didn't. So as we look at things now, as we look at the situation we're in, we look at everything that we're studying and discussing together and these conversations that are amazing. Is that what brings us together is faith in each other and the searching for truth that we all have, and not searching for intellect or searching for some sense of superiority over another, but just genuinely trying to understand how we view some of these concepts and how we view our world and how we view our responsibility to that world. And I hope that that's not super convoluted and out there in a million different pieces. This is welcome to the way that my brain tends to operate. But I don't know, it gives me hope. At the same time, it gives me a lot of reason to reflect as to what am I doing so that I'm not being judgmental, and that I am allowing a faith in humanity to exist as I, navigate my life. I'm going to turn this off now and let somebody else chime in, because now I'm just rambling.
I've had very similar thoughts, Tyler, and here's where I've landed in the time being. It may be rational and reasonable to not support a mob of people or a group of people or a particular party, but I can always give the benefit of the doubt, have faith in, listen to, love, learn from an individual, one-on-one. I will never feel, unless somebody looks really angry and has a gun at my nose, I'm not going to fear an individual. I'm always going to leave space. I'm always going to hold open the possibility that this person is somebody I can learn from, or I can serve and have a relationship with. And so one-on-one, I think, is a very different prospect than two political parties at the national level with millions of individuals involved. And since I'm not a government leader at that level, I have the blessing of not needing to worry about those battles. But I can hold space to build relationships, to listen, to learn, and to have faith in my neighbor. or the stranger at the grocery store, or the kid who's crying on the sidewalk because he scraped his knee. And I think that's the place where most of us will ever have the most influence. And so I think the answer is both, Tyler, if that makes any sense to you.
I don't know. When I think of faith in mankind, in a way, when I look at us when we behave, and when I behave in a kind of a selfish, egoic way, I don't even have, faith in the way we use it in myself in that case. However, and I agree with you, Julie, when I connect with someone in a way that I feel and sense them in, I feel like it's in with God partnering in that, and I see who they truly are, and they see me, and we start seeing each other. I like the title of that book. It's To Know As We Are Known. How do we even know each other? As you start getting these connections in God, then it's not just a faith in each other. It's a faith and knowing of who we truly are beyond all of our shenanigans, our silliness, our defensiveness, our pride, our devising, to realizing that the truth is that we are who we truly are, and that we truly are connected, although we flail. And so I guess I'm careful with that. What do I have faith in? And what faith makes a change that does connect us? And so I guess that sounds a bit jumbled, but these are the deep things. These are the important things. What is this? But when I've been invited to a home, I've met a homeless person that was basically I was at this place over by a Target where someone was handing clothes over a picket fence, or not a picket fence, it was a chain link fence, but 10 steps away, you could walk around and hand it to that person. I watched and I thought, that's neat, first of all, that they're giving of themselves to that person. And it's a shame there's a fake fence there. I felt impelled to go around and talk to this person. And that this lady, let's make it her name is Julie, says, you know what, no one comes and talks to me. I asked, what do you need? She's like, I don't need anything. But was happy to talk and felt a connection there. So, and I think the way we do make those one-on-one, like you say, Julie, but even that increases my what do I do? This increases my connection to all the outcasts in a way, and makes me more free. I could walk around a gate that has no lock on it, and no door and so I can be a little more free. And in so freeing myself, I find others to be more free. And then I start to see my nature a little bit more, this divine nature. And I see the divine nature of a beautiful homeless woman,
Thank you for sharing that, David. I love that analogy of these fences, because I think fear is a fence. And the part of your quote that stood out was, not knowing is the first step toward truth. But even earlier when Tyler was saying, what are people searching for? My question is, are people searching for anything right now? Some people are, but I feel like there's a lot of this numbing, especially with Candy Crush, or not that Candy Crush is bad, but if that's all you're doing and you're not seeking for other forms of truth, and you could be numbing with alcohol or any other sorts of addiction. But it made me wonder, first of all, are people searching? Second of all, once you start the search and you reach the not knowing part, fear has a tendency to set in. And so with that fear, we have these fences that we've built up. Oh, I can't go learn about another religion because that would threaten my own faith, or can't learn about another political party's views because that would threaten. And it's like, really? Or are those pretend fences? And maybe we need to start walking around to the other side just to have a discussion, just to have a connection. It doesn't mean you have to become homeless yourself. It doesn't mean that you have to become Islamic or Jewish or whatever other faith you want to go study. I personally am of the Christian faith, yet I have some of the most deepest connections with those of the Hindu and Buddhist and Jewish and Islamic faiths. Those are some of my deepest connections are with them. And so not to set up these, like you said, these fake fences, because it ends up being a bondage unto ourselves, but it also ends up being a bondage in our families and in our communities if we can't get over those fences. So were there any other parting thoughts? I really like the personal application that we've journeyed down during this discussion. Tyler, do you have something you want to contribute?
Yeah, I just have one more thought that's kind of come to me as we've been talking about finding fences to get to know other people. How many fences do we put around ourselves where we don't want to venture in to the deep dark corners of who we are? Tiff, help me out here. Is it it's not Brene Brown? Who is it that talks about this? In order to have a light, you have to have shadow.
It's The Dark Side of the Light Chasers is the name of the book. I can't remember her name.
The Dark Side of the Light Chasers, though, it's this concept that you need to be able to accept in yourself that you have the capacity to be the most revolting, reviling things that you can think of. Not that you are those or will become those, but you need to have the ability to recognize that for all of the potential for good, you have the potential for the evil on the other side in equal measure. And I wonder if that's one of the reasons that we are nervous to go and to talk to, going to David's example, to the homeless person, because what if that was me? There's no way I could be homeless. There's no way I could be that dirty. There's no way I could be that destitute or whatever, right? I can't go talk to them because I might sense a piece of myself. So I think that's the two maybe takeaways from this is, one, get to know those around you. Don't let yourself be limited by those fences that prohibit you from venturing to the other side to see somebody else's perspective. But then also, don't limit yourself to your own fences of who am I as a person? Can I have faith in myself? Because if you can't have faith in yourself, it's not possible to have faith in somebody else. You have to know your propensity for good and evil so that you can really have that faith that I am doing the best that I can.
Great, Tyler. I think it's I can't be more free than my own mind is. And often our mind is such a trap that, so for me, these readings have been a journey in self-freedom and opening to see where are those. And agree.
I think this is great that we're talking about individuals that go through this deliberative process and gather together in groups to come up with a consensus where everybody is not begrudgingly agreed, but freely agreed and open to what where the discussion has gone. And I think that there needs to be a perfect harmony, as perfect as it can get, with our leaders thinking the same way as their constituents that voted for them. And that's why it's hard to separate the two, because if we are complaining about our leaders being disconnected in all of these virtues that we've been talking about here, then it's a reflection of the voters. And so there's a larger group of voters who are obstinate in some way or unopen. And so I think I don't like to think of Anti-Federalists as Anti-Federalists. It's a name that they didn't call themselves. It's a name that we've given to them. Instead, I like to think of it as a debate between two similar but different think tanks that are trying to warn against the possibility of unvirtuous leaders that are in control that can affect the rest of us. And An example of that is Benjamin Franklin mentioned how during the Revolution, when they were gathering for the Declaration of Independence, they had prayer before every meeting. And at that time, of course, there was a lot more, clergy was all paid. Obviously, in our era, we have both paid and unpaid clergy much more available. For some reason, I don't know why it didn't occur to them, well, why don't you guys just take it upon yourselves to pray? They felt like they needed to hire a clergy to come in. That happened during the Declaration of Independence, but not during the Constitution. But even then, there was this deliberation, sometimes hostile at each other. But then when there was a consensus, I believe it was captured by Benjamin Franklin when he was observing one of the chairs. They had very ornate chairs in Independence Hall, and he noticed that the ornate chair had a back that had a half-hidden sun on the back of the chair. And he says, you know, during the deliberations of this meeting, I've often wondered if that was a rising or a setting sun. And now at the conclusion, in other words, feeling a consensus in the spirit of the meeting and the conclusion that they came to, he goes, I now know that it's a rising sun, not a setting sun. Maybe that's a good place to end this.
That's a beautiful place to end this. I actually just saw that chair a couple weeks ago. I was in Philadelphia, and as you enter the Independence Hall, it is a spiritual experience to feel that spirit of, that's where they sign the Declaration. But it's not only the signing, it's the miracle of, you know, 50-ish men coming to the same conclusion. And they witnessed themselves that it was nothing short of a miracle and the hand of God that occurred, not only with the Declaration, but then again with the Articles of Confederation, and then again with this Constitution. And I mean, to have especially the northern states and the southern states come to a miraculous consensus with regard to the slave issue as well. I mean, this Constitution is not perfect. It was created to create a more perfect union, but they recognize, especially on that issue of slavery, that it is not perfect, and that they had hopes that in the coming years that would be abolished. Well, some of them had hopes for that. And so it was, again, one of those things where you had to compromise on both sides in order to have what would be now the longest standing Constitution. And it is a miracle, and it is a sacred place, and these are sacred events. And this country still is sacred, whatever God it is that you choose to worship here on this land. It's a sacred place to live, and but it starts with us. So yeah, at the conclusion, I hope that we'll all seek more to see where individually we have these fences, where we are not connecting with others, mostly if we're not connecting with ourselves. Is there a not knowing inside of us that has us fearful, and then having the faith to move forward and to remedy that. So thank you all, and we'll talk to you next week.